Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'll be sharing how to make your own shoulder pads right from the comfort of your home or your studio. So basically shoulder pads are often seen in blazers, jackets, coats, some gowns, some evening dresses, as well as blouses. So if you do want to know how to make this, you want to keep on watching up to the end of the video. So these are all the items that I'll be needing. I have some satin. I'm using satin because it's kind of lightweight and you do not need thick fabric for shoulder pads. I have tape, I have my scissors, and this foam right here. This foam is half an inch thick. So the thickness of this foam is half an inch, and that is because I don't want the foam to be too thick. And yeah, so as you can see, we're just going to place the tape and it's exactly half an inch in thickness. So these are all the items that we will be using to make the shoulder pads. To begin, I'm just going to measure across the width and I'm having 6 inches. So what I'm going to do next is to measure out the length, and you do not want it to be too long. You need anything from 5 to 4 inches, so anything from 5 to 4 inches fine. So I'm just going to fold the foam into two, into two like this, just so I can cut my two pieces out at once. So I'm working with 4.5 inch at this point, so you can see that I basically folded the foam into two to make a fold. And yes, I'm just going to secure that with a pin while I work, and the width is 6 inches, so I'm basically using 6 inches and 4.5 inches because we will be trimming the foam. You do not want it to be too small because when you end up trimming you might have it shorter and smaller. So you just want to ensure that before you start trimming the foam you have enough room to trim so you don't end up falling short at the end of the whole process. So basically I'm just using pins to secure it, and once that is done I'm going to cut off the excess foam from the top like this. So this foam that is pinned and folded is what we'll be working with. Next up, I'm going to cut a curve from one end over the top down to the other side. So basically we'll be cutting in a D shape, or I'm cutting out a D shape from one side to the other side, cutting across the top. So since I do not want this to move, or I want it to be as even as possible, hence why I'm using pins to hold it down. So this is how we're going to cut from this end all the way to the top and down this other side. So we're cutting a D shape or a semicircle, whichever way you prefer to call it, a D shape or a semicircle. So that is basically what I'm cutting out, and I'm kind of trying to ensure that I do not cut through the pin. So you want to make sure you remove the pins when you get to where you have pins basically. So this is it. You might want to even it out a little bit more, and to do this I'm just going to fold it into 4 to ensure that the edges and the sides are even. So this would help to even the curve or the semicircle or the D shape a lot better. But you might not have it perfect, you can't have it perfect, but you can at least try to make it as even as possible. So what I'm going to do next is to cut this open in that fold, or that folded area open, just so we can have two separate pieces, because you want one for your left shoulder and one for your right shoulder. Next I'm going to take off the pins and start trimming the edge of the foam. Now when trimming, you want to trim along that curve from one end to the other end, basically the areas we curved earlier, or basically the areas we just curved out. So these are the areas that will be flattening. Yeah, I think flattening is the better word. So this curved area would flatten it from this point all the way to the other point, because that would sit on the inner part or the inner section of your shoulder, while the thicker part would be on the outer corner of your shoulder. I really do hope I'm explaining this properly. So this part of the foam that we are flattening at this point would be fixed on the inner part of your shoulder, while the thicker part would be at the outer part of your shoulder. That hence why you do not want that inner part to be too bulky. You want to make it as flat as possible. And to do this, I'm just using my scissors to make that curved area flattened. You might not have it as flat, but you want to ensure that it's not so bulky. So I'm just going to go in with another pair of scissors, because I found the first one really stressful. So I tried to go in with a smaller pair of scissors to just trim. So I'm using forceps at this point, not even scissors. I got this forceps for small cuts, and this is the scissors, or this forceps is what I used to cut my buttonholes. So you can see that this point is thicker than this curved area, and both pieces have been flattened. Do not worry about the roughness or how it's looking at this point, because we'll be covering up with satin, and I'm just going to even it out a lot more to ensure that both pieces are even, because when you trim, you tend to make room for some unevenness. Yes. Once that is done, the next step would be to cut out your fabric. Do note I'm using lightweight satin, because you don't want to use very thick fabric for your shoulder pads. So what I'm going to do is to fold my fabric into two like this, right sides facing, and then I would place the foam onto the fabric that I just folded, ensuring that the straight part of the foam is on the folded part of the fabric, and I'm just going to cut around that curve. Now when cutting, you do not want to cut exactly the same size. You do not want to cut out your fabric using the exact size of your foam. You want to give room for some seam allowance. So you want to ensure that you give about a quarter of an inch thereabout around the curved area of the foam. So this is what it should look like when you have it cut out. So after trimming, my width was reduced to 4.5 and my length was reduced to 3 inches. You see why you have to make enough room for your initial foam, because when you trim, you're going to lose some pieces here and there, but yeah, it's fine. Next up, I'll be placing the foam on the wrong side of my fabric and just kind of closing it up like you would normally do for sausage or meat pie. So I'm just going to place the foam in between the pieces of fabric, or a piece of the fabric like this, and then I would sew across the curve from one end to the other end. So to ensure that my foam is properly placed, I'm going to notch the midpoint of my satin on both sides like this, and just make a little cut on the other side as well to mark out the middle point. So once that is done, I'm going to open it up. We have it looking like this because we cut on fold. Remember, we cut the fabric on fold, so that straight part of the foam would be on the midpoint of the fabric, which we just notched out, and I'm just going to secure it with pins properly, just so it doesn't move while I sew, because it's satin, and satin might can get a little bit slippery while you sew. So I'm just holding it down with pins to ensure that it doesn't go anywhere. So having pinned it down, the next step would be to sew it around this cut edge, and to do this I'll be using a zigzag stitch, not a straight stitch, and I'll be sewing at the edge of the foam, not the edge of the fabric, because we would be giving room for excess fabric and movement if we sew at the edge of the fabric. So when it is sewn, this is what it looks like. I used a zigzag stitch. I'm just going to go ahead and iron it down and mold it with my tailor's ham. Now to do the molding, I'm using the edge of my tailor's ham, which I normally use for princess darts and bustiers, to kind of mold it and stretch it. As you can see, while ironing it, I'm kind of stretching it on one side with my hand and using the iron to stretch it out and press it down on the other side. Now basically I do this because your shoulder or our shoulders are not straight. It has kind of a slight curve, if that makes sense. And if you want your shoulder part to relax well on your shoulder or your garment, you have to mold it to ensure that it curves slightly, not intensely but just slightly, like I am doing. And I'm using my iron and my tailor's ham to just do the molding. Now do note that if your fabric tends to fray, you might go ahead and overlock if you do have an overlocker, but if you don't want to, that is fine. If your fabric doesn't shed, it is fine. And this is what our shoulder pad is looking like. Do let me know your thoughts in this in the comment section about this video. Do give me a thumbs up if you learned something or enjoyed the video, and do subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Share, comment, like, and I will see you in my next video.